Our second reading this morning comes to us from the book of Psalms, a familiar one, Psalm 23. You know the thing about familiar texts from Scripture. You think you know what they say, so listen carefully. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. May God add a blessing to this reading of the Word. Great. It worked. I'm starting a series of sermons today about the parables of Jesus. And they were inspired by my trip to Florida and our visit to the Ponce Inlet Lighthouse south of Daytona Beach. We climbed all the way up and looked at all of the buildings that they've so carefully restored. And they have a museum in which they show you all the various kinds of lenses. And it struck me, there's a pun that only works in English between parabolic lenses, which is what makes the lighthouse light work, and the parables of Jesus. So I'm going to work off of that pun. And I wanted to kind of explain to you and you'll see lighthouses around church everywhere. There's a couple on the communion table this morning. This lens is called a parabolic lens. Sometimes it's called a Fresnel lens after the French guy who invented it. Basically that center part, you have the light in the middle of it, and this probably goes all the way around. The light in the middle emits light in every direction, as lights do, right? But if you're building a lighthouse, you don't want the light to go in every direction. You want it to go in a particular direction. And this set of lenses, and it really is a complex construction of lenses, do that. At the center, on all four sides, is just a large circular ground lens, like a magnifying glass. Remember when you were kids and you'd go out on the sidewalk on a sunny summer day and focus the light of the sun onto a leaf and catch it on fire? I hope you weren't the sort of boy who tried to burn ants or something. That would be terrible to think that about you. But beyond, all the way around that, you have a set of prisms who take the light that's going off in other directions, bend it a particular angle, and send it in the same direction as the light which is going directly out to sea. The result of this is that a fairly dim light can be made to be visible as far as 20 miles out to sea, depending on how tall the lighthouse is and how far over the horizon it can shine. That light obviously has three purposes, and that I want to draw a connection to Jesus' parables because I think they have a threefold purpose as well. The first of those purposes is to help mariners to know where they are. So as the mariner maybe is traveling down the coast of Florida and sees that there is a lighthouse on this chart and then sees the light at Ponce Inlet, then the mariner knows, this is in the days before satellites and GPS and all that stuff, the mariner knows, I'm here on the chart. The first purpose of the lighthouse is to tell mariners where they are on their journey. And Jesus' parables have that primary purpose too. We are all in life on a journey of exploration, a journey of learning, a journey of service. And we need to know, because, we're at sea a lot of the time. And we need to know, where are we on this journey? What kind of progress are we making? If you think you're one place on the chart and you're really another place on the chart, you can get in trouble. If you think you're one place and behave as though you're one place and in fact you're somewhere else, you could end up on the rocks. The second purpose of the lighthouse light is to warn a mariner of shoals and reefs and rocks, things that will damage or destroy or sink the boat. And Jesus' parables function that way, to warn us of the places where on our spiritual journey, our journey home to God, we might encounter rocks that will take the bottom out of our ship. And the third purpose is, and this is the case with the lighthouse at Ponce Inlet, was to mark where the inlet is. Because the inlet, in that particular case, leads to the inland waterway and the St. John River and the harbors and the safe anchorages that are just inside the barrier islands along that stretch of Florida coast. And the lighthouse, for many years, marked where Safe Harbor was. If you were a fisherman and you were looking to go home at the end of a long day, you were looking for that light to show you where home was, to show you where safety was, to show you what your destination is, so that you knew you weren't going to go on the rocks, that you weren't going to miss it, that you weren't going to end up on the shore. Those are the three things: to show us where we are on the journey, to warn us of danger, and to show us the way home. And that's how it works. You can put that picture of the lighthouse back up if you want. The lawyer, somebody learned in the law, comes to Jesus while he is teaching. And Luke tells us that his first comment is because he wants to test Jesus. Now, he's not a Pharisee. He's not out to trap Jesus. He's not out to get Jesus to say the wrong thing. But he's a lawyer, and he wants to engage Jesus because, you know, some of you are lawyers, some of you know lawyers, some of you are married to lawyers. My experience is that, you know, the people who are drawn to the law are people who are in their heads. And so the way that this person wants to test, to see if Jesus is for real, to see if Jesus makes sense, to see if Jesus is the teacher they want to follow, he wants to engage Jesus in a little bit of the law. So in order to test Jesus, he says, how do I know how to be acceptable to God? And Jesus, being a good didactic teacher, says, what do you think? And he, being a good lawyer, says what he thinks. And that he recites the Shema, and he adds that piece onto the bottom, which also comes from the Old Testament scripture. So love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. All the parts of a human being should be focused on serving and loving God. And love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, got it on the first try. Go and do that, and you will live. And then Luke says, both times Luke gives us an inkling into this guy's motivation. He said the second time is because he wanted to be justified. We've gone beneath, for the lawyer, we've gone beneath and beyond the intellectual. First, it's a question of the law, and does Jesus measure up, and does Jesus know how to think, and does Jesus get it? Is he theologically correct? He passed that first test, and now it's not about the test. It's because of something personal that this lawyer wants, which is to be justified. That is, to be brought right with God, to be lined up with God. And because he wants that, he asks the question, who is my neighbor? Now, maybe he's asking that because he wants to make sure that he gets there. Or maybe he wants to make sure that he doesn't have to go too far. So he either wants to know what is the target I'm aiming for, or he wants to know what are the targets that I don't have to aim for. We don't know what it is, but this is a personal question now. Who is my neighbor? I don't want to do too much. but I want to make sure I do enough. Jesus begins to tell the parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus sets this up really carefully, and you have to pay attention to the details. The first thing that we say is that a man was walking down from Jericho to Jerusalem to Jericho. Nothing about his setting out and nothing about his destination tells us who he is. We don't have his name, so we can't deduce what sort of a person he is. Is he a Jew? Is he a Samaritan? Is he another kind of Gentile? We don't know. And the next thing that happens is he's set upon by robbers. And Jesus is very careful to tell us a number of things, one of which is they stripped him of all of his clothes. So we can't tell whether he's a rich guy or a poor guy or a Samaritan or a Jew or a Gentile or what. And the next thing that Jesus tells us in the story is that they beat him up rather badly. So he is a person in need, and they left him half dead, which means unconscious. So this guy, you can't ask him, who are you? Are you a Jew? Are you rich? Are you from the good side of town or the bad side of town? Do you believe the way I believe, or do you believe the way somebody else believes? We don't know anything about this guy. Are you a Christian or a Muslim? Do you date women or men? Nothing in Jesus' description of this man allows you to either include him in or to exclude him out. The first person along the road is a priest. The priest looks at the man, doesn't know whether he's alive or dead. And this is important because this priest is probably coming down from Jerusalem, coming off of his 2-week set of duties at the temple, at which time he would needed to have been ritually pure and ritually clean. To touch a dead body would make him ritually unclean for a considerable period of time. So there's something at stake for this guy. He might not be able to get through the rituals of purification in time for his next shift at the temple. He would also go home and not be able to interact with his family, because by doing so he would make them ritually unclean. The fact that he also doesn't know whether this guy is a Jew or a Gentile comes in, because if he's a Gentile, that will make him ritually unclean and unable to do his duty. One of the mistakes we make with this story is that we think that Jesus wants us to understand that this priest guy is a bad fellow. No. Jesus wants you to understand that this is an important person in the community. This is a person who has important responsibilities at the temple. This is a person who will be adversely affected. He's not a bad person, but there's something at stake for him. Important stuff. He's a respected person of the community. He has important work to do. If he stops and this guy is dead, or if he stops, turns out this guy is a Gentile, then he can't do the important work that he has to do. He can't make his living. He impacts negatively on his family. He has lots of things to think about. And he makes the choice to go across the road, pass by, and cross back and continue on his way. Because by doing so, he avoids knowing whether this guy is alive or dead. Because if he's alive, he has a religious obligation to stop and help. But if he doesn't find out, then he gets around that. And the next is a Levite, who is a member, probably a lower level priest in the priestly class, the priestly clan, but who has a lower level of responsibility, but has the same things to worry about. He can't serve in his role in the temple if he has touched a dead body or if he has been in contact with a Gentile. He can't afford to know whether this guy is alive or dead. So he makes it his business not to know. Again, Jesus is not vilifying these guys. He's setting them up so that the people listening understand these are people with important work to do, and they have decisions to make, and they are hard decisions to make. And they make them. The next person down the road is a Samaritan. Samaritans live in what used to be the northern kingdom of Israel. They practice a kind of mongrel form of Yahwism, of the same religion as the Jews, but they center their religion at Bethel in the high place. The Jews think that that's just a pagan center, just like the Baals were worshipped on a mountaintop. Never mind that Zion is also a mountaintop, but when you're busy hating people, you don't always look at the details. And the fact is that the Samaritans don't feel any more positively towards the Jews. There's lots of hate going back and forth in both directions. The fact that Jesus chooses a Samaritan is to have an emotional impact on his audience. They know when he says Samaritan that they're not supposed to like this guy. They're not supposed to approve of him, and they're certainly not supposed to assume that he's the hero of the story. So I want you to just imagine the groups of people that we in our society hate. And different ones of us hate different people, but most of us find somebody along the road to dislike or disapprove of. So if you want to hear and feel the emotional impact of what Jesus is saying, then insert the group of people that you despise. So use the N word. That's what Jesus says when he says Samaritan. Insert homosexual, if that's the thing that is, pushes your button. Or Arab, or Muslim, or Jew, depending on which group is the one that makes you a poor person, or something. Whatever pushes your button, insert that instead of Samaritan, in order to feel the way Jesus wants you to feel as this story opens or continues. A Samaritan. Ew. One of them. How could they possibly be righteous? He's obviously a businessman. He has an animal with him to carry burdens. When he stops, when he sees the guy, Jesus says his heart is moved with pity, with compassion, with empathy, with love. And he goes to the man not knowing any more about who he is or whether he's worth it or not. And the first thing that he does is he cleans the man's wounds with wine and oil. These are expensive things, probably things that he's carrying to sell. So he's already begun to pour out his self and his wealth for this person. And he bandages his wounds without any worry about whether, he's touching a dead person or whether the person is a Gentile or any of those concerns. And then he puts the man on his beast, which either means at the very least that he's walking rather than riding himself, or that the beast was a beast of burden, more likely, that's the case, which means that he has to unload the stuff that he is on this trip in order to sell. And he leaves them beside the road where we already know there are robbers in the vicinity. So he unloads the things that are of value to him in order to put this person on his animal. So he's already continued to pour out his substance on behalf of this person, who he doesn't know whether he likes or not, whether he approves of or not, whether he loves or not. And then he goes to a place along the road, an inn of some kind, or a household where they take in strangers on the road. And he stays there for an entire day. He's a businessman. Time is money. He spends an entire day caring for this person. And the next morning he goes to the innkeeper and he says, "Here are 2 denarii, which is what you pay a laborer for a day's labor." So it's not a small amount of money. It's not pocket change. It's not just your right glove that you lost the left one off. And then he says, "Take care of him, and on my way back, I'll check on him, make sure how he is, and I will pay you any additional money that you've spent in his care." This man has gone way, way, way out of his way for this person, and he has no idea whether he's worthy. He has no idea whether he's worth it. He might be a robber himself. He might be the member of whatever group it is the Samaritan doesn't like. All he knows is this person is in need. And Jesus asked the question of the lawyer. He said, "So, who was a neighbor to that man?" And the next thing is so telling. You know, it's so telling. Well, the one who was merciful to him. He can't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan. Jesus says, "You've answered rightly. Go and do that. Go and do likewise. Go and be just like that member of a group that you despise, whose name you can't even say out loud. Be a Samaritan." And you can add all of those unpleasant names in your own mind, the ones that suit you better. This is what it means to be a neighbor. Do you see how Jesus really impacts not just the lawyer, but all of us? You want to know where you are on the spiritual journey? Well, God is waiting next to the Samaritan, whoever that might be. Perhaps it's some children in an African village who need to be sponsored and whose village could prosper if enough of that kind of care were focused on them. Jesus is sitting next to that person of that group that you despise and waiting to see what you will reach out with to them in the way of compassion or justice or advocacy or help of a material or financial type. Where are you on that journey? Jesus convicts us with the question. He shows us where home is, what God cares about. He shows us where the danger is, that we will be so wrapped up in our own concerns and our own priorities, even when they are really good ones, like the priest's ones, that we'll be so tied up with our own priorities, our own question about what's too much, what's not enough. What if I give him the money and he drinks all it, he gets drunk on it? All of those questions that we use. Is he really worth it? He's spending his food stamps on seafood, for crying out loud. Jesus convicts us when we put ourselves in the position of the judge of who is worthy and who isn't worthy. Jesus shows us the way home. He shows us what God is like. And he shows us where we are on the journey. As all his parables do. And there's no answer to any of those questions except the answers that this story draws out of your heart and out of your mind. Jesus doesn't tell the lawyer what he has to do. He doesn't tell him what party he has to vote for. He doesn't tell him how much money he has to give. He doesn't tell him what things he needs to volunteer. He tells them this story which helps him to see where he stands along life's spiritual journey. And he tells this story which shows him where God is. And he tells him this story which lays out where the rocks and the shoals are between here and God. And he leaves him to make the decisions about what to do next. That's how Jesus teaches. That's why he uses parables. And I, for one, thank God that he does. One of the great pleasures and joys of what I do is when we experience God calling people to leadership. And God has done that through your voice. And today is the day in which we ordain people who have not filled these roles before and install those who have filled these roles before.